Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Throughout this session, I've highlighted 4 priorities I believe we need to focus on: affordability, housing, education, and public safety. But I didn't just ask the legislature to talk about them. I asked them to make real progress towards solving the challenges we face. And now that we're well into the session, it's important to make sure the incremental progress we've made turn into bills I can actually sign into law. First, education, which has gotten a lot of attention after it passed out of the House last week. So I want to be clear. It still needs a substantial amount of work. And I've shared our concerns about the costs, timeline, and structure with legislators. However, its passage was an important and necessary procedural step in the process, so the Senate can continue its work to drastically improve the bill. And while there is broad agreement that we need to move to a foundational formula and achieve scale to make sure all students have more opportunities, we have a long way to go before we get to the finish line. Next, public safety. I want to thank the Senate Judiciary Committee for moving some important bills which are part of our public safety package, and hope the House Judiciary Committee will move the bills as quickly as possible. These bills include things like sealing records, expediting the return of criminal offenders to the state they're facing charges in, and repealing the sunset on beds available for those who are under the influence and need a place to go, because our emergency rooms are not the right place for them. We've also seen some progress in the energy and affordability policy areas, but not enough, because I continue to believe we need to make changes to address some of the energy challenges we face, including repealing policies which expose us to unwinnable lawsuits, and do more to address the increasing cost of electricity and heating fuel. My team will continue to prioritize things that move us toward cleaner energy and emissions reductions, but not in ways that punish Vermonters. Unfortunately, although there appears to be support for expanding the child tax credit, increase the earned income tax credit, and expanding the exemption for Social Security income tax, some in leadership continue to resist repealing the income tax on military pensions, which almost every other state already does. As a reminder, eliminating this tax has bipartisan support in the House and Senate. In fact, a majority in both chambers are co-sponsors of the bill. I'm hopeful the legislature will eventually do the right thing, but I'm concerned they're just playing games. And to be honest, if that's true, it's really disappointing. They're using our veterans, those who have sacrificed so much for all of us, as political bargaining chips. Commissioner Farrell will talk more about where we're at with our housing proposals, but I do think it's important to note that we have a real opportunity this session to make progress, so families already here can afford to stay, and we have the housing stock to attract those we desperately need. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Farrell.
Thank you, Governor. So a lot of folks have heard the governor and heard myself talk a lot about the ways that we feel the housing crisis here, the impact that it has on families and folks looking for homes. And I've also talked a lot about the data that's resulted from analysis from my department, the Department of Housing and Community Development, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, regional planning commissions, municipalities, and many other stakeholders that have studied Vermont's housing market. Everyone agrees resoundingly that we need a dramatic increase in housing production. I'm going to talk about some of these numbers briefly, but then I'm going to bring it back to the solutions that the governor has put forward and why they're necessary. The housing needs assessment makes it clear that the state needs at least 24,000 to 36,000 new homes by 2030 just to begin to experience a more healthy housing market. Further analysis into our housing market was able to identify housing targets for 2030 and 2050. These targets identify the level at which the state should be producing homes in order to drive better outcomes. If we want to meet future demand, that would improve Vermont's demographics, bring vibrancy back to small towns that once thrived, and dramatically reduce homelessness. Further analysis sets that target at 41,000 homes by 2030. When I picture that Vermont, I see a reality that improves the lives of every Vermonter, and the data supports that. These are big numbers that are frankly hard to picture in a rural context, but luckily our regional planners are using the data to identify each community's share of these targets and make it more digestible and show how they are attainable. So here's some examples of what these targets look like in a few communities for a region where they have already done this work. So this 41,000, this would ask Burlington, our largest city, to produce just over 420 homes per year. That's in a city of over 18,000 homes. And this asks Jericho to contribute 25 homes per year, and Milton to contribute 77 homes per year, and Huntington to contribute 11. With the right policy changes, all of this is doable, and just consider what we stand to gain versus the drastic cost of what we stand to lose if we don't act now. As it stands, we are not on track to hit our 2030 target that would allow for this economic growth in Vermont of 41,000 homes. We aren't even on track to come anywhere near the 36,000 homes which we need to accommodate the projected need. We're currently on pace to produce just over 12,000 homes from 2025 to 2030, which is woefully inadequate. In the governor's Path for Vermont bill, he laid out a series of proposals to give us a real chance at improving this picture. I want to applaud the legislature for taking up aspects of this bill, but I need to reiterate what I said when we introduced the bill. These proposals, all taken together, will create meaningful change. It's not enough to only act on some and cast aside others for fear of a difficult political path forward. The Path for Vermont bill proposed further improvements to our permitting and land use systems, rebalancing the appeals system in favor of home building. It made strategic investments to support home construction and provided tools and financing of infrastructure to lower the biggest barrier that our communities and our home builders face in home building. As a reminder of some of those key investments, it included over $9 million to establish a fund to support infrastructure for home building, a new project-based TIF tool, which provides communities and builders with a financing tool to finance the infrastructure and invest in their future. Ongoing funding to make the Vermont Housing Improvement Program permanent, ensuring the creation of roughly 100 homes every year at a fraction of the cost of traditional grant programs. Ongoing funding to make permanent investments in our mobile home parks, $30 million to support the creation of middle-income homes for home ownership and for rental, because the current housing market is failing our middle-income workers as well. Paired with these investments are proposals to extend the interim Act 250 exemptions for enough time for our communities to adjust to this new tiered structure and to adopt their permanent exemptions. Our communities and our home builders desperately need that predictability. Wild shifts in the regulatory structure are not going to be helpful. So I asked the legislature to please make the investments laid out in the governor's budget and in this bill and give real consideration to these desperately needed regulatory changes. Do not neglect the hard conversations just because they might be challenging or uncomfortable. And we stand eager to do this in partnership with them. Now I'm going to pass it to Evan Langfeld, who's one of the folks on the ground doing this hard work of building homes for Vermonters. Evan?
Thank you, Commissioner Farrell. Thank you, Governor Scott. Good afternoon. Vermont is facing a severe housing shortage, especially for working and middle-income households. This deficit is holding back economic growth, workforce retention, and community sustainability. To truly address it, we need more than just funding. We need meaningful reform of the regulatory systems that prevent housing from being built at the scale and pace required. We're at a particularly difficult moment. Construction costs have surged over the past 4 years, interest rates remain high and uncertain, and looming tariffs and broader economic instability are discouraging both home buyers and home builders. Without swift, meaningful action, Vermont's housing shortage deficit will grow, undermining the progress we've all been striving for. First, we need to address housing and regulatory reform. The current permitting and regulatory framework, especially Act 250, was not designed to support the scale of housing development we now need. It often adds time, cost, and uncertainty to projects, even those in already developed areas. Regulatory clarity and timeframes must align with the realities of housing development. Developers need a stable, predictable framework, especially in areas that can and should support growth, to justify the significant upfront investment in planning and permitting. When exemptions or streamlined pathways are too short-lived, they don't provide the certainty needed to bring projects through to construction. If the rules keep shifting or timelines are too narrow, the investment simply won't happen. We can't afford to have gaps between the temporary exemptions and the permanent regulations. 2, we need to provide funding for missing middle housing. Traditional affordable housing funding serves the lowest income households, while market rate housing often prices out middle income Vermonters. Missing middle subsidies help address this gap, providing tools to create homes that teachers, nurses, and first responders can actually afford to buy or rent. These subsidies won't work if the regulatory environment prevents housing from being built in the first place. Policy alignment is critical. 3, we need to make serious progress in reforming appeal rules. While community input is vital, the appeals process is too often used to delay or derail well-planned housing projects, even in areas that have been zoned and permitted appropriately. Reforming the appeals process doesn't mean eliminating it. It means ensuring it's used responsibly, with timelines and standards that prevent abuse while still protecting due process. Lastly, we need to optimize existing and incent new infrastructure to support housing creation. Even when housing is permitted, infrastructure often becomes the bottleneck. Water, sewer, and stormwater systems are at or beyond capacity in many of Vermont's towns. Strategic investment in infrastructure, especially in already designated growth areas, can unlock thousands of units of housing that are otherwise shovel-ready. Vermont's housing deficit is solvable, but only if we align regulation, resources, and infrastructure. Reform isn't about lowering standards, it's about modernizing a system that wasn't built for today's realities. Let's create a policy environment that actually enables the housing we all agree we need. If we can all agree that we are in the midst of a housing crisis, then let's treat it as a crisis and prioritize meaningful solutions. Thank you, Governor Scott, for your focus on this issue.
Thank you, Ethan. We'll now open up to questions. Okay.
How many of those 12,000 on-target homes that Commissioner Farrell mentioned are second homes, like at ski areas, or is that all sort of primary homes?
Some of those 12,000 that are built would include second homes, which is part of what needs to be factored into. So when we put forward a number like 41,000, it's taking that into account.
Okay.
Having been away a bit, you mentioned before I left about creating a water holding area across the wayside where the state garage is. Is that moving along?
Yeah, we're moving forward with that. We've decided to move the facility. It's going to be up in Berlin, and in fact, they started boring, do some test pits yesterday, I believe. So it's moving forward, and we'll still need that facility until the new one is built. But yes.
And then do you hope to have it be a water holding area?
Well, we hope to utilize it for storage capacity and so forth, depending on what they allow us to do. But yeah, it's to actually do two things. One, prevent us from having to move out every time it floods, and two, to provide some storage capacity to help out downstream.
Okay. Is there an environmental problem there?
We've had to do tests on the soils there at this point in time. I don't think that's going to be a game changer, but I see Secretary Flynn on here. He might be more in touch with that, but I know we have to work with the federal government on that to make sure that we're not, exposing an environmental problem. Secretary Flynn?
Thank you, Governor. Yes, we have conducted a phase 1 environmental survey, and we've entered a phase 2. We're working with the Agency of Natural Resources. We're working with a consulting firm as well. And as the governor said, of course, it'll have to pass any EPA regulation. What we know of on that property was no surprise. We've been there since 1955, and the property predates that. So I think if there's good news, there was no surprise, and it's mitigating what could be there. And quite frankly, I think the plan is still uncertain as to whether or not it's better to leave what's there or to remove what's there. So, that's still something that's in discussion. But like the governor said, it's a site that the water has made it clear it's going to go there regardless of what we do. So the smartest thing we can do all the way around is to stop trying to fight the river and make it the most useful area for water storage going forward, and then relocate our facility up to the Payne Turnpike.
And then your idea of in Barry for reconstruction of the homes that keep flooding, keep having trouble across from where Lions Rockies used to be.
Right. The Gateway Project, we're still working on that. There are some buyouts that need to be put into place, and we're working on those as well. We have some agreements on that, working with FEMA, but also the city, hand in hand with them to see what the art of the possible is. So again, it's slow. The process is slow, but we're making some progress.
It looks like some people are rehabbing already.
They are. And again, my concern is that it's going to flood again, and they're going to be in the same position. So unless we raise those structures and with foundations that exceed the level of flooding, then they're going to be impacted again in the future.
Would you consider a drawdown of some sort in the flood control dams in the summertime?
I don't think
Or just the
I don't think that will do it, to be honest with you. I mean, it's complicated when you think about the amount of water. The flooding we see in Barry, for instance, isolated flooding because of the high intensity rain that we've seen, whether it's in Barry or Plainfield or up in Lyndonville. It's been in a very, very isolated area, and it comes down a lot of it in a hurry. So it's not just about the river flow, it's about the intensity of the rain at that particular moment overwhelming the storm system.
And you're searching for a new prison out of state, or you think you will renew with the prison that's in Mississippi?
I don't have the answer to that at this point in time. I'm not sure when that contract expires, to be honest with you. I'm not sure. Commissioner Demmel is here.
Yeah, so we're in the
why don't you-
middle of the contract. This is on the private facility in Mississippi?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're in the middle of a contract, and we don't anticipate changing that anytime soon. And that's with the facility in Mississippi.
It doesn't expire? When does
It does expire. I don't know the exact date, but I think we're only about a year or two into the contract right now, and I think there are some options to extend, and we haven't had any issues with that contract to date.
Okay. So is sleeping 3 to a cell down in Springfield not cruel and unusual punishment, putting one incarcerated individual on the floor?
Yeah, so there are times when there are capacity issues that we work through, but that's not our standard practice.
I understand, but it is a practice.
It does happen occasionally, yeah. We have limited infrastructure in our facilities, and we don't determine who comes to our facility. So if the numbers go high, we do have to address that with different arrangements.
Okay.
As long as you're up there, Commissioner. Some Senate leaders yesterday asked the administration to terminate its contract that allows federal immigration authorities to lodge detainees in state-owned prisons. Would be curious to get your thoughts on that.
Why don't I answer that first, and then we'll have him add anything to that. I was a little surprised by the press conference that they had urging us to cancel the contract. So I looked into the contract a bit, and it would take 120 days to cancel it. That's in the contract itself. It does, I think it ends in August at this point in time. So we're very close to the natural evolution there. Having said that, I have some concerns about, and I get, let's back up a little bit. I get the frustration that people are feeling. People want to do something about what they're seeing happening, not just in our state, but across the country. So they see this as an opportunity to at least take some action. But I'm not sure it helps the people that are being detained by moving them out of Vermont. Like, as I think ABC 22 had a headline last night that said the detainee that was recently detained was relieved that he is in Vermont. And that struck me as something we should consider. We have a judge, Judge Sessions, that is, I think, compassionate, level-headed. We have a system of detaining people that's been in place. We treat people well there. So I'm not sure, and I get the frustration, but is that in the best interest of those who are being detained to just ship them off to somewhere else, Mississippi, Texas, wherever some other agreement is being utilized? So again, I don't think it's as easy as just saying we should end the contract. That'll end what they're doing, ICE is doing, because that'll continue. So again, I think we need to discuss this further, but it shouldn't be a knee-jerk reaction.
You said that this request was born out of people's desire to do something.
Yeah.
Do you share that desire? Do you want to be
Well,
able
it's
to do
frustrating.
something?
It's frustrating in some respects, but at the same time, we don't have a lot of control over the federal government. We can control some of the things here, and again, those who have advocated for this see this as an opportunity to do something. But again, I'm not sure that that's in the best interest of everyone.
Did you say that this Marwadi was he released?
No, he's being detained here.
He is being?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood you.
Yeah, I'm just saying that if we end that contract here with the federal government, and people who are detained here in Vermont are going to be sent somewhere. They're not going to stop, I don't believe, because we don't have a detention center.
You or your team had conversations with CBP or ICE about the MOU and the people that
Have not, that I know of, and maybe Commissioner Demo can expand upon that. No, there is a, if we want to make adjustments, we can do that. If we want to end it, we can do that. But it's, again, it's in the contract, the MOU. It's 120 days notice by either party.
And so it ends in August. At this point, would you support renewing it? Would you want it?
Again, I think we need to think through this, and I look forward to working with the legislature on this, because I know they have an interest. But what's in the best interest of those we're trying to protect?
Yesterday, Senator Phil Baruth described this as more of a moral imperative as well. You know, he mentioned due rights and process being not followed and taken away by some or from some. That is, I mean, do you share that concern or that level of alarm, or is it misplaced?
I think I said this in a statement yesterday, but I think everyone is deserving of due process. If there is something there that they're being detained for, the reasons behind that, the federal government should tell us or tell the courts. And you know, as far as due process goes, in this situation that you're referring to, it is going through the court, and Judge Sessions will hear that and is probably asked for that information as well. And then we have to figure out, you know, as we move forward, you know, who are we mad at, and who are we afraid of, or who is a danger to the state or to the country, in order to ask them to leave. And I think it's as simple as that. And if they can provide information that shows they're a danger to society, danger to us, then, you know, maybe they should leave. But if they're not, if we're just mad at them for something they've said, that's not a good enough reason from my standpoint.
Have you seen evidence that leads you to believe Mr. Badawi should be detained?
I haven't seen any information, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm just reading it like you are, or reading some of what you write. So I don't have anything more. We've asked the congressional delegation, the senators, to provide us anything they hear, so we're working with them. But I haven't seen anything either way.
And I just want to note, I think his case was transferred from Judge Sessions to Judge Crawford, who I understand comes from a different legal background that
Yeah.
might affect the outcome here. Maybe a better question for Commissioner Demmel, but as of February and March, we were seeing increased census numbers in terms of the number of federal detainees, immigration detainees in Vermont's prisons. What are we seeing in the last few years?
I actually thought it was fairly level, but I'll let Commissioner Demmel answer that.
Yeah, so we're following that data closely and trying to build out our data collection so that we really do have the best information. The census itself remains kind of in, I would say, a normal pattern. We've seen ebbs and flows over time under both Democratic and Republican presidential administrations. What we are seeing is a lengthening of stay, and so that's something we're following closely, but we're just in the kind of early days of the administration, and so that information, the sample size is fairly small.
Does your department have any other agreements with ICE in terms of sharing of data of the people you detain?
We do have agreements with both the Marshal Service and with ICE. I think there's 3 agreements in total, and they cover different pieces of this, but the MOU that the governor was referencing is the primary vehicle that we have our agreement with ICE.
Can you elaborate on the 2 other agreements?
Certainly we can provide them. I think that's something that we've provided in the past.
But they're just high level. What do they govern? What do they
Yeah, so they're operational agreements that define how we interact with the government and what our responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are. There is a piece on data sharing. There's a piece on our limiting of folks coming in because we're at capacity. So those more operational elements of how the interaction works.
Is there anything in there about whether detainees need to be criminals or accused of a crime in order to be detained in Vermont prisons?
So those are distinct agreements. So the Marshal Service agreement deals with federal criminal detainees, and so if an immigrant detainee were to be charged with a crime, they would move into the Marshal Service custody. And so there's a separation there between folks who are in the immigration process, which is a civil process, and folks who are in the criminal process, which would be dealt with in a different organ of the federal government.
So the state of Vermont does allow immigration officials to detain people who are only charged with civil offenses to be detained in Vermont prisons. Not the criminal accused of a crime is not a requirement.
Right. The ICE agreement deals with individuals who are going through a federal civil immigration process, not a federal criminal process.
A couple months ago, when we asked the governor about whether we should be concerned about mass deportations taking place in the state of Vermont with the assistance of Vermont law enforcement, I thought the answer was there's no risk of that because the agreement that we have with federal immigration officials does not allow such detainments to occur without crimes being accused or without the people being criminals. Is that not the case?
So there is a distinction between the immigration process and the criminal process, as I just mentioned. As it relates to mass deportations, as I just said, the data does not suggest that there is a major increase in enforcement actions in Vermont.
Commissioner, besides Madawi, are there other federal anti-Semitism or terrorism-related detainees in Vermont?
No, not presently.
Is it?
Yeah, that we're aware of. And we don't have a whole body of information on everybody, but that's the only one that we're aware of that would fit into that category.
I understand there's been legislation proposed in this building that relates to renegotiating or re-examining the MOU with CBP. Is that something, can you explain kind of the conversations your team has had about that and if that's something you support or where that discussion is at?
Well, again, we have heard from legislators that they have an interest in this. So we'll continue to have those conversations. Again, I just want to stress, I'm not sure if it's in the best interest of those who are impacted to end this contract. So those are the discussions we have. I mean, it's not about money. It's not about losing money or gaining, revenue. It's, at this point, what's best for them.
Representative Ballin says her concern is that the Trump administration is establishing a new sort of an environment in which federal agencies are going to be arresting and detaining any U.S. citizen that they think has used their freedom of speech in ways that upset the president. Do you think those concerns are founded?
Again, I think we have to determine whether they're a threat to society. Are they a threat to Vermont? Are they a threat to our country? Or are we just mad at them? And if we're just mad at them, then we should not be detaining or for any long period of time.
Mahmoud Khalil was arrested and detained last month. Rumeza Öztürk was detained earlier this month. Have you seen any compelling evidence from the government that you think justifies any of the arrests of people who were targeted for their protest activities?
Again, I'm not privy to that information, so I don't know if there's any there. But that's something that needs to be determined, and that's why in this case, I thought it was Judge Sessions, but Judge Crawford. They should get to the bottom of it and determine whether there's anything there where they should be deported. And if not, then as I said before, they should be released.
All right, we're going to switch over to the phones now. Ed Barber, Newport Daily Express.
Good afternoon. No questions today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Keith Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
Hi, I was just curious if you and the legislature are, are you on the same page with regard to these immigration issues? Are you talking with each other to kind of see where you're at and where you're not, or where is that at? I'd be wondering.
Well, it depends on which legislators you're referring to. I think with legislative leadership, at least with the Speaker, I've been in contact with her. But I haven't spoken to the pro tem at this point.
Do you plan to at any point in the near future?
I have a standard, I have a standard meeting with both of them on a biweekly basis. So I believe the pro tem is on Friday. So I'm sure we'll have that conversation.
Thank you.
How much does your calculus on the ICE MOU have to do with thinking about the Trump administration and what might happen if we were to end that agreement?
Maybe expand upon that a little bit more.
I guess, you've been clear that, we need to take the actions of the federal government on a case-by-case basis. We need to respond logically. We've seen that other states have had their federal funding targeted when they've taken stands against the administration. Is that relevant here?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not relevant from my perspective, but I'm sure with Senator Sanders going around the country and drawing the large crowds, that might have an impact on Vermont as well, maybe more than anything else. You take a look at some of the states that he seems to be concentrated on, and some of them want to run for president, for instance. So I don't know what impact that will have on us, but we're always wary of it here in Vermont, but it doesn't impact the decision making.
Governor, whether we're talking about immigration policies or DOJ, Department of Education, Title IX, you name it, what is your sense of how, if it has, or has it changed policies and the workflow of this legislative session? You listed at the beginning the buckets that you'd like to see, but has it changed the nature and the flow of this session?
I think it does disrupt the flow of work because all of a sudden we get caught up in the rhetoric and the outrage, and that seems to be where we want to shift our focus. So we spend a lot of time on that ourselves, but also with the legislature. So that's why we need to continue to go back. I mean, we can't put our heads in the sand because it's happening, but at the same time, we have work to do for the people of Vermont. It's really important. So I don't want us to lose our focus, and that's why I keep saying, just focus on our work. We can do this as well, but don't let it take over everything that we do, because sometimes it's just rhetoric. And sometimes, as I've experienced with this administration, that it seems as though it's done purposely to take our eyes off from something else that might be happening. So the outrage is there. And I get the humanitarian issues and the outrage, but at the same time, let's be smarter than that. Let's not fall into the trap each and every time.
Any update from you or your team about how things are going with tariffs, Canada, whether that be some of the trade partnerships that we have, or the electricity we buy from Hydro-Quebec? I know it's sort of a shift.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a perfect example. You know, one day it was on, one day it was off, and it's off, and it's on, and it's, you know, we're focusing on that. Every day we're getting questions about what happens next, and then nothing happens. So in the meantime, we're spending a great deal of time chasing all that down when we should be working on housing, you know, some of the other concern, property taxes, all kinds of things, education reform. We should be dealing with that. So it's difficult because the knee-jerk reaction with all of us is a human reaction. We want to go where somebody needs our help, but we can't forget what we've started and what we need to do to help the people who are here right now.
I know you mentioned letting federal judges, Judge Sessions, Judge Crawford get to the bottom of these cases, but we've seen repeatedly, like with the deportation flights to El Salvador, that the Trump administration has not always followed what courts have ordered to do, right? Like, are you concerned about that in this case?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I worry about, you know, our country was founded on basic principles, like freedom and due process and so forth, and exercising our rights to free speech and so forth. So I worry about the erosion of that and what could be happening as a result. So yeah, I'm obviously concerned about that.
Well, I guess what I meant was, does that impact how you're thinking about what your administration should be doing in response to, like what the senators were talking about yesterday, with should the state be taking more action on its end? Like,
but again, yeah, I mean, I've considered that, but is it going to have the effect that we want? So you eliminate the contract, you cancel the contract, then what? Does it mean it stops people from being detained? Nope, it doesn't. Are they just sent someplace else that maybe they're not as safe as here? Yeah. So, you know, you have to think this through and be smart about what you're doing.
Couldn't you make the case that by canceling the agreement, you'd be making it more difficult for immigration officials to work in the state of Vermont?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, they don't seem to care where they bring them. I mean, detain them. They're going to continue to detain whether you have a detention facility or not. What's it to them?
I don't know. Travel times would be increased, manpower would be increased if they need to.
I don't think that has any effect on them.
Are you worried at all that the message that you're basically sending to the state of Vermont is that you intend to continue cooperating with immigration officials even though we've seen these demonstrable examples of things that you say you're deeply concerned about?
But that's not going to stop them from happening, is my point. If somebody can make the case to me that eliminating this program, canceling this program, the detention agreement that we have, the MOU, is going to stop people from being detained here in Vermont, I'm all ears.
Well, obviously, there's no way that doing that would, in and of itself, prevent the federal immigration officials from doing anything, but it would certainly make it more difficult for them to detain people in the state of Vermont.
You really think that?
Well, in the state of Vermont.
Well, in the state of, they just bring them somewhere else. They're not.
But it is what Vermont can do to not
It's not
cooperate with.
But it's not helping if they're brought to Mississippi or Texas or someplace else, right?
Or you just over the border to New Hampshire, right? I get that.
Yeah, I just don't see how it helps anything.
So,
It might even hurt the situation.
Governor, you and the senators all expressed concern about the use of the federal authorities using masks, unmarked cars, no insignia on uniforms, that sort of thing. I wondered if maybe Deputy Commissioner Batsey or some police person could give us a reason why they might be doing that. Some explanation of what's the purpose of that.
Well, I think that would be a better question for the feds. I mean, the Deputy Commissioner can weigh in, but it just seems out of character for us here in the U.S., right? The transparency that we all love, that we were founded on, and this is something I would see in another country. I might see it in China or some other country that doesn't appreciate freedom like we do, and transparency, and it just seems counter to everything we believe in.
On a different subject, I think you talked last fall about small nuclear potential.
Yes.
Is any of that going forward?
Well, it's just the concept. In fact, I was Governor Lamont from Connecticut was up in this area on Friday. He was speaking at an event on Friday night, but he stopped in and we visited for an hour or so, and we talked about that. I mean, he has an interest. We have the whole all New England governors have an interest in doing something to provide for carbonless energy in the future. So it should be part of the mix, we feel.
But nothing's actually started.
No, I mean, it's a ways off, right?
Is your portrait started?
No.
All right, we have time for one more question. So we're
Your
gonna go back
thoughts
to the
on the
phone.
House passed bill that reimagines the general assistance program?
I think it's, again, I look forward to showing how this reduces the costs significantly, because if it just increases the costs and just directs the money to another entity, I don't think we're solving anything.
What just spends the same amount and does a better job?
Well, I'll take a look at that, really. I'm all ears.
All right, but so you don't have any specific analysis yet of what you like and what you don't?
I don't know where the Senate is at this point in time.
All right, we're gonna go back to the phones for one final question. Keith Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
I was thinking about this when we were talking about whether it's better to have immigration people detained here or somewhere else. To what degree can we protect those people? Like if the feds decide to ship someone to El Salvador or something and then forget about them, like what would we be able to do to stop that, or at least know about it, or whatever? Like how much leverage do we actually have?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have any leverage in that regard, Keith.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all very much.